David Fincher has been making iconic thrillers for the past 3 decades. While most of his fans will ask you, what's in the box?
What's in the box?
Or sing along with Where Is My Mind, it's his more tame films that often get the stamp of approval from Hollywood's critical elite. Do you ever wonder why that is? And which side of the Fincher coin should you fall on? Join us today while we answer those very questions. This is the best and the worst of David Fincher. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another thrilling episode of The Best and the Worst. Yes, I use thrilling for a reason. It's been 10 years since The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo came out, which means today we are doing the best and the worst of the thriller god that is David Fincher. What's up, everybody? I'm Andrew Ghai. Joining me is Ben Bateman, who, this is your favorite director working right now, isn't it?
It's a weird thing to say out loud because I think I had such an idea for a long time that somebody else or a couple people occupied that spot at one.
Antoine Fuqua.
It was always Antoine Fuqua. It's still Antoine Fuqua. No, I mean Michael Mann was that guy for a while. Paul Thomas Anderson was that guy for a lot of years. I loved Nolan. There's a lot of people I've really loved, but it's been in the last 2 or 3 years that I think I've recognized there's a quality to this guy, to David Fincher. There's an exacting quality to his filmmaking that I just can't get enough of.
Yeah.
I can't think of a group of movies that I am more like, I just need them. They're like a drug when it comes to movies.
Which is crazy because a lot of Fincher films are kind of hard to watch.
Yeah.
So before we get into that conversation about his movies and, of course, a very difficult but very enjoyable watch in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, this is a brand new podcast. We've done 3 episodes so far. They've been going great. We've been getting a lot of ratings and reviews, which we cannot thank you guys enough for. We're actually going to be shouting out the people that left us the reviews at the end of the episode. But Ben, what is the best way to help this podcast grow?
Yeah, brand new podcast, guys. It's extremely important that when you want to support that podcast, you do a couple things. The first one is you leave a rating. You actually just go to the podcast app. That's the place. Leave 5 stars. A whole bunch of you guys did it already, which is so cool of you. The second thing is you leave a review. A couple words. Like you said, we're going to shout a few of those out later in the show. What do you think of the show? Honest to God, even if you have a complaint or a criticism, leave that. We would love to see it. We want this show to be the best it can possibly be. And finally, the last thing you can do is you can follow over on Spotify. It's the other place that you can check it out. So thank you so much for supporting the show so far, and I think let's get into talking about Mr. Fincher.
Yeah, Mr. Fincher and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I think the craziest thing about this show is every single time it's obviously inspired by an anniversary, and usually we're going to go like 10 years at the minimum, and I'm always blown away by how much time has passed since these movies came out. Like, I said it with Drive, I'll say it again with Girl with Dragon Tattoo, is it really feels like it's only been a few to several years, not an entire decade.
I said it to our good friend Alex Kessler. I was like, yeah, our next episode is a 10-year anniversary of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. He goes, I don't like that. I go, he didn't like the movie? He goes, no, I don't like that movie. It came out 10 years ago. He goes, I can't believe it's been 10 years. I feel old.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of that on this show. We also date ourselves quite a bit. We say cool things like happening.
Yeah,
and
we
slick.
do. Yeah, and jiving.
We don't say those things. we shouldn't say those things. So I guess let's just get right into it with our anniversary film. And we love to ask this question at the beginning of every single episode. Ben, what's the first thing that you think of when you think of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo?
Look, man, I knew you were going to ask this question because it's the top of the show question. And I want to ask you the same thing. It's an uncomfortable question with this movie.
It is, because I'm pretty sure no matter what, there's a couple scenes that stand out in this movie to every single person that watch it, and they are ingrained in your brain, whether you've seen it once, whether you've seen it 5 times, and it's just 2 scenes that happen within about 10 minutes of one another.
It's kind of an insane movie in the sense that I don't think most people, when they think about the hardest scene they've had to watch in a movie, I don't think this movie comes to people's mind very often. It's a David Fincher movie. It's pretty highbrow. It had a lot of acclaim when it came out. It's got an incredible lead performance. It's not even really a movie where the scene that we are talking about is an essential piece of the movie's plot. It's almost like a background piece of forming our main character. It's not a piece of the mystery or the plot of the film. It's really just this. And you have to ask yourself, how did the scene end up in the movie? But we are talking about a brutal sexual assault scene that happens. It's spread over 2 scenes, really, in the film. And I can remember watching this movie the first time so vividly with my girlfriend at the time in a theater. And I remember the scene happening and grabbing like the handles of my seat and thinking like,
It's so uncomfortable.
what am I like? Do I like look away? Do I like hit her and like let's leave? Like what do you do? Because it's like so weirdly uncomfortable in this movie. It is filmmaking, and obviously as an artist, it's his choice to put the scene in. He's so exacting in his filmmaking that he obviously, this scene matters a lot to him because you don't just put this in a movie unless...
No, and you don't put it in the way that he did it. I mean, he Finchered the shit out of this scene. Everything from the shots, to the music, to the angles, to the set design, to the sweat, to everything about this scene. And, you know, credit to everyone involved. I wish I could remember the name of the guy, which I looked up earlier, but obviously Rooney Mara is phenomenal in this movie. You mentioned that. This movie had 5 Oscar nominations. This was at a huge point in David Fincher's career, and, you know, Rooney Mara was a big-time up-and-comer. Daniel Craig was Daniel Craig. You know, he's still pretty freaking famous. This movie feels super forgotten, maybe because of those scenes, and I guess forgotten probably isn't even the right word. Maybe like swept under the rug, something that you're kind of trying to avoid, because, you know, there's the 2 sexual assault scenes. One of them is horrifying, the other one is horrifying but also vindicating when she gets him back. But those scenes alone kind of stand on their own. Like you're saying, they're not really a huge part of the plot of the film. They obviously add a lot of emotional layers to your connection with her connection with men, the film's connection with sex, because there's a lot of, and we apologize for, you know, trigger warnings and all that, there is a lot of rape in this movie and a lot of rape discussion in this movie. And I think in spite of all the things that Fincher's done in his career, this is the one movie that is probably the hardest to stomach and revisit.
Without a doubt it is. And it's really, you ask yourself the question here of, you know, that, so I will say it. That is the first thing that comes to mind when this movie is discussed for me every time.
Yep.
Because you essentially separate it from almost any other movie you can think of that is such a beautifully made film. There's just not that many movies I can think of that have the kind of beauty this film has, that have a scene as hard to watch as that. And not every scene that is difficult to watch is the same type of scene as this. Some are incredibly violent, gory. You know, there are just scenes that are unsettling to watch. But I mean, some scenes like Adaptation and when he's getting the pie, that's really hard to watch. But
that is really hard to watch. Salute to him and Judy Greer there. So I guess if, you know, you and I have both seen, I think we've both seen this movie maybe like close to 5 times.
Yeah, 3 or 4
like
for
3 or
me,
4 times. Yeah, and obviously you never forget that scene, but since you are more familiar with the movie and maybe you're able to, you know, digest other parts of the film, what did you notice this time that kind of stood out?
You know, I think the thing that stood out to me this time that was so essential was the work of the cinematographer. The cinematographer's name is Jeff Cronenweth. It was his 3rd of 4 films that he actually did with Fincher, and I think a lot of his most respected work is stuff that he did with Cronenweth. You know, you have Fight Club, you've Gone Girl, you have Dragon Tattoo, Social Network. It's really beautiful. You can see that the way this film is set up. I've often said this before, that when I watched Pretty Woman the first time, my idea of a rich guy is Edward in Pretty Woman. It's like he's the best rich guy I've ever seen in a movie. He's so believable. He doesn't seem like he's trying too hard to be the rich guy, but he's cold. When you think about it, if I was to say to you, like, old family, incredibly rich, made their name in industrial Sweden with a dark past, and you showed me just without any sound this movie, it's what it looks like.
It gives you such a great feeling. I love that you said without any sound, right?
Yeah.
Because the thing that stood out to me this time when I watched it was Trent Reznor's score, and we'll get to that in 1 second. But when you talk about watching this movie with no sound on and just kind of ingesting all the scenery, it's a really beautifully shot movie. It's very bleak. It shows you the kind of like the grand scape of the island, but also how small it is at the same time. It feels like you're off in your own little world when you're there. And then when you add in, you know, kind of the relationships that the characters have with one another, the way that it's shot is just, it's just incredible. I mean, it makes sense that this guy has been Fincher's go-to cinematographer.
Yeah, I mean, it's that you can really focus on a couple of the main shots. The one that always stands out to me is the shot when he's first entering the island and he's going down that long road approaching the house, and you have these 2 identical like pillars on either side as they go through the gate. It looks like CGI shot of a haunted house or something. It looks like it's been created in a lab. Like you couldn't imagine something that would be so perfectly symmetrical. And there are a bunch of shots in this movie that feel just like that. Even the architecture, all the buildings that they use, Stellan Skarsgård's place, like just all the angles.
His place is so awesome.
It's just like not all of it.
Not all of it. That's a good point you make.
So that's the stuff that really stands out to me. I think visually, Jeff Cronenweth did just an unreal job with this movie. If I close my eyes, I can think about so many of just like the different color palettes and pieces of this movie that make up the dark, moody vibe. And the truth is, the sound, the Trent Reznor Atticus Ross score, is an enormous part of that as well.
The pacing of Fincher movies is almost unrivaled, like period. I think in filmmaking, in modern filmmaking, especially in modern thriller filmmaking. But then you add in the Trent Reznor score to anything. I mean, last night I rewatched Social Network, and it's very similar in there. But there's the moments when they're trying to figure things out, or the intense moments, or like the moments after something horrible has happened. What Trent Reznor does with the music, it's so crazy how people, or at least a lot of people, and maybe how I used to look at film when I was growing up, is like you just turn on a movie, you just sit down and you watch it, and you walk away and you're like, wow, that felt this way.
Yeah. And
you don't even think about all the incredible details that go into it, how much the score affected the way you feel, how much the set design and the costuming made you feel like you were actually there, how much the cinematography made you look at the movie exactly how you were supposed to, or look at the characters the way you're supposed to. And there's really only a couple combinations out there, like Zimmer and Nolan, but like Reznor and Fincher, with what he's asked to do in these movies that are slow yet paced aggressively, if that makes sense. So much of it is all about his freaking music.
Well, the crazy thing about the Trent Reznor Atticus Ross combo is that when they started working with Fincher, it was Social Network, and obviously Trent Reznor. I mean, it's weird. Again, we're going to date ourselves, but Nine Inch Nails in our day was a big band. Like when we were young, really, they were a really big band. They're not really a big band now in the same way they were. He's far more famous, Trent Reznor, now for his movie scores.
Yep. But
he did Social Network, and then he did this film, and then he did Gone Girl, and then he more crazy is he did Mank. But it's this old timey. It's this old-timey, 1930s, 1940s music. It sounds nothing like these movies, but he was nominated for another Oscar for that score.
Well, I mean, it's because even in this movie, when he does, the strings that make you feel on edge, or when he does, the techno moments, so you're like, all this you have to remember is oh, yeah, these aren't songs.
Yeah.
These aren't, things that are out in the world. This is what he created for this movie, and, imagine, you were talking about watching this movie with no sound to enjoy the cinematography, but imagine how barren this film would feel watching it with no music. It's just so important to the vibe that he's trying to get across in this mystery, because it is actually a pretty engaging mystery.
I think if I was going to describe this movie with one word, it would be cold. I don't think that there's any word. And the funny thing is, you could describe probably more than one Fincher movie that way.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, when you say cold, the first thing that pops into my mind is The Revenant, just because, for some reason.
Yeah.
But definitely, this movie feels a lot like the word cold. I'm trying to think of another one that feels a lot. I mean, Gone Girl feels very cold. But that's not even because of where they're located. It's just because of the actual interpersonal relationships that go on. So, you and I, we have this thing called fist pump moment.
Yes.
And it's that moment where something's happening in a movie, you look around, you're like, oh my God, I get to keep watching this? You want to pause the movie, call your friend, be like, yo, Ben, what are you doing right now? Wait, you're where? I don't care. Pick up your phone, go to this scene. 10 minutes, 37 seconds into the movie.
I'm eating dinner. I'll call you afterwards.
I know you're eating dinner. That's why I called you. This is more important. That's what a fist pump moment is.
It was born from the literal experience of watching a film and having the
yes, baby, let's go. This movie doesn't have those.
I would say that by and large, Fincher movies just don't. They have something else. They have incredibly satisfying, exciting moments.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about some of them in the episode, but it's very difficult to find the moment that you feel good about cheering for in a Fincher movie.
Because even in, the scenes that we talked about at the beginning of this show, the second one is actually pretty satisfying. Right?
Yeah, she gets her vindication.
And it's so gnarly.
Yes.
It's so freaking gnarly.
Yes.
There's the metal dildo,
Yeah.
there's the tattooing,
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of blood, all of it. It's really hard to watch, but at the same time, you're like, good. great, but you don't fist pump. You're kind of just like, okay,
There
what's
are
next?
there are things in his movies that are like subtle fist pumps. Like I think when I was watching this time, and he's like, "You left some things out of your report," and she's like, he's dating his boss. It ruined her marriage, not his. Sometimes he performs cunnilingus, not often enough, in my opinion. Like she says that line, I was like, this character's the best character I've ever seen.
I was distracted by your perfect accent there for a moment.
It's so good.
Cunnilingus. Yeah, no, that part is definitely great. I actually had a fist pump moment later on in the movie when she actually confronts the dude again in the elevator.
Yes.
Like, that was actually a pretty satisfying moment. But he doesn't really have a fist pump, so that would probably be... I think that's my best moment in the movie. The thing that's closest to a fist bump is the moment where she confronts that, I guess he's an attorney or whatever, again in the elevator, and you see him trembling. You see how scared he is. You see how in control of the situation she is, and then you see how shook he is when she leaves the elevator.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is just like, that's right, bitch.
I think the other one for me, because like, do you ever have that thought where you're like, okay, give me enough money and a great director, and you'll show me something I've never seen in a movie, right? Like, it's that thought. When she takes the golf club and she gets Skarsgård in the face, it's like, if I was like, I want to see a great makeup, high-budget movie with a full swing, all strength into someone's face, not their head, their actual face.
Yes.
And then the way his jaw is like, it's like mangled and just he has like this dent in his face. It's like such a savage moment.
And
when
like
that
his
happens,
eye is kind of shut because of how swollen his cheek is.
when that happens, that's kind of a fist pump. That's like a pretty savage.
Well, because like, when you're watching the movie for the first time, and even honestly for the fourth or fifth time, like I just did the other day, it was... Skarsgård's just going to kill him right there. He's not going to toy with him. I couldn't remember exactly what happened. I wasn't sure if he did the whole thing where you put the bag on the head and then you take it off, because I thought he was going to go through this whole torture thing. But he's just getting right to it. And you see, I love, you talk about cinematography, I love the shot of him and Craig with the old 90s video recorder set up, and then us looking through those lenses. It's such a cool and eerie kind of look into this world that Skarsgård has created in his horrifying basement.
He's got the knife behind him. He's holding it behind him as though he's kind of going through this motion. It's like ritualistic. You're like, oh, you've obviously done this before. You sort of have the way you're going to do this. You want to do this. Skarsgård's very good in this movie.
Oh yeah, the whole monologue or the speech, I guess he has about how people are more afraid to offend than they are for getting hurt. People would rather be hurt than they would offend people. And he's like, you came back in. Why'd you come back in? I didn't force you. I didn't. That whole thing is just written so perfectly. And I don't know, I thought, I think maybe the first time I was like, I think Daniel Craig's gonna die. I think he's gonna die, and then she's gonna come maybe kill him later.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know. So
you knew something was wrong, but you came back into the house. Did I force you? Did I drag you in? No. All I had to do was offer you a drink. It's hard to believe that fear of offending can be stronger than the fear of pain, but you know what? It is. And they always come willingly.
It's a bit of a bummer because I think The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is actually a really phenomenal movie. I just think it's a really hard one for people to kind of go out of their way and watch if they haven't already, and it's also a hard one for you to kind of sell people on.
Why do you think this movie why do you think it's so forgotten? It comes at a very specific time in his career, in Fincher's career. We'll talk about him in a moment, but it was very well, strong acclaim, a lot of Oscar nominations. It's very good. I think just at its core, I think this is a very good movie. It's 10 years later, and this almost just feels like a movie that came and went for people. They made a freaking remake with Claire Foy. They didn't even...
Right, and I don't know if he helped produce that series or something, but he definitely didn't direct it. I think it's just because of how dark it is. I really is. And I think it's specifically because of those couple scenes. I think that there's a lot of people out there that would rather just not watch it ever again.
Yeah.
And just have that in their mind. It's very similar to Requiem for a Dream, right? You go back and you think about the end of that movie and you're like, yeah, but I could just turn it off before that happens. And still, I know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I know how the movie ends. So let us know what you guys think about The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and maybe why it wasn't as successful as maybe you think it should be. It's definitely not as successful as I think it deserves. I think it's a much better movie than people talk about. But the thing about this movie that we did realize that ties directly into Fincher's career is we have our thesis statement that we'd like to talk about. It's usually a bridge that gaps the idea between the movie that we're celebrating an anniversary and the topic of the show. And the topic of the show is David Fincher, the best and the worst of. So his thesis statement for Fincher, I'm going to let you do this because he's your guy.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask someone the question of the category is thriller. Thriller is the movie, right?
Yep.
Who's the greatest thriller director of all time? And most everybody's going to give you the exact same answer. It's one of those stock answers everybody says.
Of course.
It's Alfred Hitchcock, right?
You have to say it.
But Alfred Hitchcock hasn't made a movie since 1976. And most of his most famous films happened 1960 or earlier. So we're talking about a guy that is 61 years past.
Yeah.
And that's the best thriller filmmaker in a genre that was literally owned the 90s. I mean, like
100%.
It's like our favorite 90s genre. David Fincher is the greatest thriller director since Alfred Hitchcock.
M. Night Shyamalan, anybody?
I mean, it's if you were to honestly even try to line up who are the closest ones, like there's interesting names, right? You have like David Lynch, or you have people that have done really really cool movies.
Michael Mann, not really.
Yeah,
'cause he has like a couple.
I think what it is you have people that have done one really good or two very good, but then the rest of their career is something else. Where if you look at Fincher's work, almost every single one of his best movies is a thriller. Almost all of them.
Mank was riveting.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think when you try to think of that list of people, it does feel like, Fincher has a complete monopoly over the market. I mean, he is just the best thriller director, period. And yeah, you're right. With Alfred Hitchcock, there's so many people out there that will just say him because it's a safe answer. But I'd probably argue at our film parties these imaginary film parties that we always talk about on this show, I would probably have the hot take of saying that it's Fincher over Hitchcock.
Yeah.
I know it's impossible. It's so far separated, and could you have one without the other? But I feel like that would be my hot take of the party.
Yeah, I mean, Hitchcock is a director who the best Hitchcock movies I've really enjoyed. The medium Hitchcock movies I've watched, I get bored pretty fast. Movies have changed a lot, so it's difficult to contextualize movies that came out, but between 1928 and like 1940, like it's a
right.
You have to have done something pretty special with your movie for it to be able to stand the test of time.
For sure, and also the whole relatability factor, the whole recency bias. 2011 is when this movie came out. What was your relationship with Fincher at the time?
Well, I know I wanted to see this movie. I saw it in theaters for sure. I liked Daniel Craig. Obviously this he had done 2 James Bond movies. This was his big movie that he was a part of that wasn't part of, because when guys are doing the James Bond thing, you don't see very many movies. He's
especially not one like this, really.
Yeah.
It's so dark and so different, and also such a prestige film.
So I know that I wanted to watch it. I think I've been a thriller fan for a while, but when it came out, I had seen Social Network, but it hadn't registered that movie was as important as it was. It was Facebook. It was that movie was like a current event when it came out. It wasn't like
at the end of the movie they talk about like 500 million users on Facebook.
Yeah,
and it's like a crazy thing, and you think now and you're like, there's billions.
It's like in 2010, like that movie didn't have the same significance. I knew that I loved Fight Club, right? We all loved Fight Club. That was the movie that had been around long enough. It was over 10 years at that point. And Seven I had seen for sure in high school. But again, like he's really famous at that point for making 2 movies. I know for a fact when Benjamin Button came out that I saw it in theaters.
Right.
Because of the technology looking crazy, and it was very acclaimed. So I think I was aware of who he was. But if you had said to me like at the time, like who's your favorite director, he wouldn't have even entered. He wouldn't have even been in like a top 10. I wouldn't have even considered him, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was probably pretty much in the same boat. I liked all the movies that you talked about. I had a really interesting relationship with film, which is, probably why you're so much better at movie trivia than I am, is that like growing up, I paid attention to what happened in the movies. And only if someone's name came up a ton of times, like a Ridley Scott or a Scorsese or a Spielberg. Like those were the guys I was like, oh yeah, that's this person's movie. But in general, if you were to catch me in 2011 and be like, hey, what are David Fincher's best movies? I'd be like, wait, give me one of them. And they'd be like 7. I'd be like, oh, duh, right, like that guy, right? Like that's kind of where I was at with him. So I didn't really have much of a relationship to Fincher specifically. I'd seen The Social Network. I watched this movie in theaters and was let down because I was expecting James Bond. Okay. I don't know why I was expecting that, but I was 20 something, so give me a break. And then I like loved Fight Club. I adored Fight Club growing up, and it's a little surprising to me that I didn't like connect the two. But for some reason, it was more about how great Brad Pitt and how great Edward Norton were. but that's like a younger man looking at a movie, right? You don't recognize how important the director is and the writing and all of the things that actually come together to make a great movie. So to me, David Fincher in 2011 was a name that meant very little.
Well, I think what you say there is super interesting because I know that prior to this, I had this period in high school. I've mentioned it before, but I guess if you guys are new to this podcast, it's kind of cool to share it. My parents split up, and so when I was in high school, my dad started dating someone, and she owned a home, and we bought the house next to her. So my dad would go and basically live at her house. And in high school, I went to an alternative school with weird hours, and I had basically lived in this house by myself for several years in high school. So I'd walk down to the video store. It was a local actual video store with DVDs. And I knew a couple people that worked there, so they wouldn't charge me for movies. So I'd walk in, and they'd give me 6 movies.
It's like a golden ticket.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
They'd give me a stack of movies, and I'd go home and I'd watch like 3 or 4 movies in a night. And so I would get on little kicks, actor kicks or director kicks. I'd just watch as many things in a row as I possibly could. So for sure, I remember during that time watching Panic Room. I hadn't seen it. I can remember during that time, rewatching Zodiac, because like I saw it once and I was like, is this movie good? The Game I watched for the first time. I watched almost all his movies because I think I was interested, but I don't think, just like you, the Academy ignored David Fincher. They like really ignored him up until basically Benjamin Button.
Yeah, right? And then that's when he like takes off with being recognized by the Academy.
Yeah, and so like who he was at the time that the Dragon Tattoo came out is such an interesting question because he had gotten a total of 21 Oscar nominations between his 2008 movie Benjamin Button and Social Network. But prior to that, his entire career had won a single editing nomination for 7. So we weren't told by the powers that be that Fincher mattered.
Yeah, right.
Literally until...
It was like, 7's a great movie and Fight Club's a great movie. But again, like what I was saying, it had nothing to do with how great he was. It was everything else that happened in the movie. The score, the actors, everything.
And we all know that when Benjamin Button came out, it didn't matter to us because of David Fincher. It mattered to us because of Brad Pitt. Oh my God,
the Brad Pitt. And it's like... Benjamin Button essentially like was nominated for Oscars because it was like, we made Brad Pitt look bad. You give us an Oscar. Like that's really what it was. And it's so this is who David Fincher was at the time that this movie comes out. He's basically 50 years old. He's 49. It's 2011. As you just said, he gets 21 nominations between his previous 2 films, but before that gets the complete snub throughout his entire career other than the editing nomination. He gets Alien 3 is his very first movie, which really feels like a departure from what he does. And he's a big music video guy.
Huge.
That's who David Fincher was. And the movies, you mentioned most of them. He'd done Alien 3, 7, The Game, Fight Club, Panic Room, Zodiac, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and Social Network. And I actually saw Panic Room in the theaters.
Oh, really?
In 2002. I saw it like as a freshman in high school. And it was super intense. Like a really great thriller at the time, which obviously looking back, it's not bad.
No,
but
it's a pretty good movie.
Yeah, so when you talk about Fincher, like, do you think at this moment in 2011 that he was now officially looked at as like, wow, this is going to be one of the next big directors of the decade?
Well, I think if you compare him to his contemporaries at the time, when this movie comes out in 2011, you basically have to acknowledge that almost all of his contemporaries who had started making movies in the early part of the 90s or late 90s, the guys that were getting acclaim, Tarantino had already won at least one writing Oscar for Pulp Fiction. He had just done Inglourious Basterds 2 years earlier, so he's way out in front. He's a rock star.
Yeah, he doesn't. I mean, like Tarantino is a name that stands on its own, where I guess Fincher does as well, but not in as many circles.
At that time, Chris Nolan had done Dark Knight in 2008, right? He had just done Inception the year before. He was the highest you could possibly get as a director. You think about even a Danny Boyle, who had been a real journeyman director in the 90s. He had done all these different eclectic movies. His movie had won Best Picture in 2008. He was flying high, right? These are the guys that you look at who are his contemporaries. This guy has all this acclaim for a movie that, by and large, by today's standards, is not very liked in Benjamin Button. That's his big movie. And then he makes this cold Facebook movie that's almost like a biopic more than it is like anything else. And that movie doesn't... now it's looked at very differently. But
I wish I could go back in time and, just watch people watch The Social Network, right? Just to see what their experience was and then, listen to them have conversations about it afterwards. Because when you go back, and obviously we're going to talk about it in a minute, but just tangenting here, is just when you watch Social Network, it is so perfect. It's so perfect at accomplishing what it's supposed to do as well. It feels almost like writing code watching that movie. It's like, well, this has to happen, so this has to happen. And if that happens, then this happens. Like, it's such a crazy experience. And that's another thing that I think Fincher does really well that it's hard to put into words is, and I think they call it like in restaurants like mise en place or something. It's like everything is in its specific place that makes you feel a specific way. And I'm going to talk about that more when we get to Zodiac. But before we do that, you guys know who David Fincher is now. You've heard us talk about the girl with the dragon tattoo. So that means we got to get down to business. The best and the worst of David Fincher, which is where you guys can get involved. So as we figure out the best and the worst, this is where you guys can let us know down below in the comments what you think. What do you think David Fincher's best movie is? What do you think his worst movie is? What do you think we're going to guess? And another thing that you and I were talking about doing that could be a lot of fun, we're pretty active on Twitter. We're not super active on a lot of other social medias. If you don't want to leave a comment, you don't want to leave a review, too bad. You got to do that first. But you can also take a screenshot of the podcast, post it up, or take a screenshot of your favorite Fincher movie and tag us at Andrew Ghai, at Ben Bateman Media. We'll start a conversation with you. We love talking about movies all the time. Literally, like the introduction to the show, the trailer of the show is a real thing. No matter where we are, we're just always talking about movies. So guys, let us know in the comments or tag us on Twitter. Let's get this conversation started. What's the best and the worst of David Fincher? Ben, according to the critics online, these are the best films and the worst films from his catalog.
The 3 best Fincher films, according to, the popular internet.
We do go off Rotten Tomato scores. We have IMDb ones written down as well, but we went with Rotten Tomato critic scores.
So the Rotten Tomatoes critic scores in order. You have The Social Network with a 96%. It was very well liked. Mm-hmm. And in case you guys don't know, you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down on Tomatoes as a critic. You don't say, I want to give it 91%. You just say it was good or it was bad. So the more good, the higher it gets, the more bad, the lower it gets. So 96% of people thought this movie was good. Zodiac, 89%. That is staggering to me, considering how unsuccessful Zodiac actually was.
And like the people that talk about Zodiac are just like people like you and me, like film critics. That's it.
Yeah. And third, 87%, you have Gone Girl. It's 3 very, very good movies, and respectively 7.7 for Social Network, 7.7 for Zodiac, both on IMDb, and 8.1 for Gone Girl. Of those 3 films, the only one in the IMDb Top 250, the 196th highest rated film in the IMDb Top 250. That is crazy. I can't believe it. Now, it's sort of weird to have honorable mentions because the guy has such a short career.
Right. I guess like the things that we can highlight is that in the honorable mentions that are, these are scores that are basically lower than 87% on Rotten Tomatoes. We have Fight Club, which is the 11th movie of all time on the top 250.
Seems accurate.
And Seven, which is the 20th movie of all time on the top 250. So those are the best of Fincher. And then as we go to the worst, we have, in order, Panic Room, 75%, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button at 71%, and Alien 3 at 45%, which, we can talk a little bit more about Alien 3 in just a little bit, but it doesn't feel very much like his type of movie. It feels a lot like, hey man, you directed music videos, you want to make a movie? Like that type of thing.
Fincher is, so he's the, probably one of, if not the only, I'm just losing my train of thought here, such a specific director and what he wants out of his films.
Yeah.
And he's notorious for this.
Yes.
He's notorious for doing 100 takes, for saying, I need $61 million to do this movie. And they're like, we'll give you 50. And he's like, I need 61.
Yeah,
like, that's
not
it.
62,
right?
not 60, 61.
I'm doing it for 61. This is what I need, and I'm not going to do it unless I can get that. Like, that's his attitude in general. So when you think about Alien 3, the story goes that, he's this music video director. He's worked with Lionel Richie and Madonna and Don Henley and huge people.
Biggest, yeah.
Yeah, Paula Abdul.
Careful what you say about Don Henley. We might get flagged.
And he gets hired to do Alien 3, and the story goes that he did the film, and it was kind of taken away from him by the studio.
Yeah. As you would assume with a movie like that, with where David Fincher's at in his career and how successful Alien has been.
And you hear this, same thing you hear with Hard 8 and Paul Thomas Anderson. A lot of these movies, these first-time directors, these auteurs, they'll kind of lose their first movie a bit. So he was very hesitant to ever kind of go down that road again. And the funny thing about Dragon Tattoo, he didn't want to do it in the first place. And the reason was he didn't want to be pigeonholed as the murder thriller director. But they sold it to him as you'll have the rare opportunity to be at the head of what nobody gets to do, an R-rated franchise. Like, it's not a thing that anybody really gets, and it'll be your franchise. Yeah. So he got that was the pitch for him to do it. Of course, he didn't get to make more movies. So
I would have loved to get the other two in that franchise. And I guess we still could have it happen, but it just feels so weird with all the time in between and the Claire Foyer one. You know, just an aside is I ran into a guy one time that was he was like a reporter in that scene at the end of Gone Girl where they're walking down the stairs together.
Yeah.
And he told me they did that take 100 times, like 100+ times. And there's not even a line spoken.
Yeah.
It's just about the energy, the looks they give each other, how quickly they went up and down the stairs. Like, he's that meticulous in his design of even shots with no words being spoken. And I guess that's why we get exactly what he wants us to see on screen. So, you know, last time that we did this thing with Ryan Gosling, you know, we did a little bit of a different formula because we have scientific formulas here on the channel. We did a bit different thing for the martial arts episode, the greatest martial artists in film. With Ryan Gosling, we kind of broke it down to 3 categories, and that was rewatchability, visibility, and approachability.
Yep.
Right? But we decided that sounded a little like a textbook, a little boring.
A little boring.
Yeah, so we decided to change it up a little bit. So for the very first one, for rewatchability, we decided to call it the once-a-year movie versus the never-again film. And I feel like this is fair because most movies that you love, you'll try to... There's got to be like 20 of your favorite movies, right? You got to watch them at least once every single year. So my watch-once-a-year movie is 100% Fight Club.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
And it has been since I was probably in high school, right? It's badass. It's cool. There's an incredible twist. There's parts of it that haven't aged the best. There's this like really crazy like ego-driven male thing, but that's also what the movie's about that you don't want to lean into. So it was actually like, it felt hyper intelligent for the time and also for how old I was. It made me feel smarter watching it. Now as I've gotten older, parts of it have aged maybe not as great as I would have loved for it to, but I still think it's aged a lot better than Seven. I don't think Seven's like a bad movie or anything, but I think when I go back and watch Fight Club, I love it. No matter what, I can turn it on around anyone, and even if they haven't seen it, they'll at least be like, oh, this is Fight Club. I need to watch this movie.
I love Fight Club. I really do. And it's so funny that the conversation about Fight Club is... I think of all his movies... Well, that's actually not even really true. There's 3 of his movies that feel like the conversation has like had such a volatile course over the last few years. One of them is Fight Club because I feel like that movie is... There was a moment I can remember when we were probably in our mid-20s where Fight Club was like... maybe the coolest movie ever made. Brad Pitt was arguably the coolest character I'd ever seen in any movie, and it was that movie that everybody you knew forever had seen.
Yes.
Right? I feel like...
you're like embarrassed if you didn't know this movie.
I feel like it's faded a little, but it's still, you know, so the other ones, though, we're going to talk about in a bit. So my pick for the once-a-year film, and this is so funny, but look, if you listen to our content, you probably know what's coming.
I knew what was coming.
I watch Gone Girl more than any David Fincher movie. I've seen it the most times. Well, that's not true, but I've seen it the most times since the first time, like in terms of like the short span, because I didn't see it until like 2017 or something. I missed it when it first came out.
But like there was this phase you went through, I think it was maybe last year, where you watched Gone Girl like once every other month. It felt like we would just randomly talk about like, God, Gone Girl's so good. I'm like, you're watching it again? You're like, I mean, come on, you know. And Rosamund Pike is the best she's ever been in that movie. Yeah. Affleck is among the best that he's ever been, and that movie is just... The reason I said cold before is because it feels so little heart in that movie with so much emotion all the time.
Yeah, it's the definition for me of a once-a-year movie in the sense that, like, when I think about wanting to watch a movie that I'm like, that movie's great. Like, I'll be engaged the whole time. It's just riveting. I can't stop watching. Yeah. It's that movie for me. Like, every couple of years I try to think about if I wanted to redo my top 50 favorites of all time. I wonder how high Gone Girl would get. It's
definitely in your top at least 15.
Maybe, yeah. It's a competitive group, but I mean, I love that movie. So that is my once a year movie. So the flip side, the opposite of your once a year movie is the Never Again movie.
Please God, put me out of my misery. I don't want to watch this movie again.
Yeah. What is your Never Again David Fincher movie?
It's literally and always will be The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. It's just so goddamn long, and I don't care enough. I don't, like, if you gave me Gone Girl for 3 hours, I would eat that up. Yeah. I would watch the whole thing. If it was just about how amazing Amy was as a high schooler for like an hour, I would eat that up more than The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Now, I understand there's some great moments in it. There's romance. There's all that. But, like, and the makeup and Brad Pitt's great. I just don't care.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I've tried so many times to go back and revisit that movie, and I get like 2 hours in, and I'm like, I've done my service.
Would you watch a Gone Girl sequel?
I would watch anything other. I would watch Mank 4 times because I'd probably be able to watch it 4 times in the runtime of The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Yeah. And to answer your question more seriously, probably. I mean, I would definitely watch it. I just don't want it to happen.
I was just thinking about it.
Do you think it's just them married and miserable?
I was thinking about it. Like, what would that movie? I was like literally sitting here as you were talking, thinking about like, what if I got 4 hours of Gone Girl? It was a sequel. I was like, what if this? I get the continuation. Like maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I guess it'd be okay.
Yeah, Benjamin Button's a great answer, and I think it.
Do you like Benjamin Button?
I like appreciate Benjamin Button, but I don't enjoy it. Like I rewatched it last year, and it was the first time I'd seen it since theaters, and I was struck by. There's a lot of really cool stuff in this movie. There's a lot of great actors in this movie. There's a lot of like romantic little vignettes in this movie that I really like.
Stuff, yeah.
But I don't find it to be compelling at all in the same way that the like the 3 movies on every other movie he's done other than of course my Never Again movie, which is Mank.
Talk to me about how many times you've loved watching this film.
I have tried to finish this movie 3 different times. Okay, and each time I do it, I start it over because I feel like I missed too much.
Yeah.
The last one, I got 20 minutes before the end of the movie, and I turned it off, and I didn't go back.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
I totally appreciate Mank. Like, I get it. I think what he does in the movie and a lot of the stuff is so cool. I think the, like, interior Hollywood stuff where you're talking about an era of filmmaking, you get to meet all these famous people is so cool.
Anytime you have a director of this skill level and how meticulous they are, and you get to go back in time, it not forward in time, but specifically back in time, like what Tarantino did and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it is amazing how they transport you back to that era so seamlessly and what feels like effortlessly.
But the fact that I can't even finish this movie, I mean, I can't say never again because maybe I'll finish it at some point, but it is definitely my never again movie. There's not another David Fincher movie that I can think of wanting to watch less than this movie.
Would hell for you be having to watch Mank over and over from start to finish, or would it be the 2 scenes from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo once an hour for the rest of your life? Eternity.
I'd watch Mank.
That's fair. Yeah, the other one's much worse. So I think that actually segues pretty well into our next thing here. So the next one is we had rewatchability, visibility, and approachability. That's right. So that means instead of approachability, let's go to the recommendation movie versus the disclaimer movie. The movie that you're like, oh God, you got David Fincher, you got to watch this movie, or the disclaimer where you're like, well, if you're gonna check this movie out, then blank.
I think with the recommendation movie, it's always the same thing because we live in Hollywood. We watch a lot of movies. We talk about a lot of movies. So when you tell people that's one of the things you do for a living, people always say the same thing. Oh, have you watched anything good lately?
Right.
Give me a recommendation. You always want to seem smart. You want to give them something you know they're going to like, right? So you try to choose something safe. What's the movie that you think they're going to like?
And I'm so glad that you say that because not only is it when you recommend a movie, you want to make sure you don't offend anyone. You don't know if they're going to watch it with their family or their friends. Maybe they're going to turn it on at a work party. I don't know why they'd be asking you for that recommendation. But it's important that the recommended movie isn't just your favorite, right? It's not the most interesting one. It's the safest one. I think that's a really great word.
Well, and I think what's funny about this is that it's sometimes picking, because Fincher is famously specific with his movies.
Yes.
I can think of a scene in almost all his movies that would lose the casual viewer because the writing is such, or the scene is a certain way, or the way the movie opens, or the topic. Like, I love Zodiac. I love it. Right. I cannot tell Joe Schmo who wants 90 minutes of fun to watch Zodiac. It's dark. It's boring.
Like,
it's
great,
slow.
Ben. That scene where dude was stabbed in the stomach at the lake didn't stick with me or give me nightmares, and the movie was depressing as hell when it ended. Thanks.
And they didn't solve the crime.
You're like, well, no shit, it didn't get solved, man.
But like, almost all his movies have that issue. So for me, the recommendation movie, this is so weird, but I think it's true. It's Panic Room.
What? Really?
I would say over all the rest, 7 is extremely dark. If somebody like I meet somebody and I'm waiting in line for coffee, and let's just say it's like a guy's like, he
made me put it on. He made me do it. Yeah.
Guy's like, hey, I'm gonna watch a movie with my girlfriend. What should I watch? My barista, or like, it's like maybe
your girlfriend, the barista.
No, what? or like, if it's like my dad is like, hey, I want to watch a movie I've never seen before. What should I watch? I'm like, oh, you should definitely watch Gone Girl. It's great. You'll love it. And he's like, that movie was really, really, really effed up. Like,
really bleak.
Made me like pretty depressed. And versus I'm like Panic Room, it's hard to not like it. It's so easy to watch.
I feel like this is a brilliant pick by you, actually. Even though when you first said it, I think I laughed because it is like the most approachable film that is satisfying, and it has a happy-ish ending.
Yeah,
Jared Leto is a bad guy that you can kind of all get behind hating. He does a really good job of being a little shit. And then Forrest Whitaker is they have all three of the things, right? They have that bad guy that I described. Then they have the redeemable bad guy in Forrest Whitaker who's empathizes with the family. He ultimately ends up coming and saving them. And then you have Dwight Yoakam, who is just the worst.
Yeah.
He is the true, like, evil on the board. Raul. So weird. That's actually a really great pick. And when I went back and watched Panic Room lately, I actually really enjoyed myself.
Yeah.
I knew that it was going to be an easy Fincher watch, but also a fun one.
It's one of his least interesting movies, but it is his most recommendable movie to an open room. What do you go? What do you?
Well, it's interesting because I wish I could just kind of steal your answer now because I think Panic Room is so good. What you said in the introduction of your movie actually made me almost second guess mine. So my recommended movie is The Social Network. The reason why is it's critically acclaimed. It's got people that you know in it. It's about Facebook, which you have. You just do. Yep. Everyone listening right now, I bet you have a Facebook, unless you're one of those people that deleted theirs. But at one point or another, you did have a Facebook, and it's like not gnarly. It's not scary. It doesn't leave you with a pit in your stomach when it's done. You might sit there and be like, wow, Zuckerberg's kind of an asshole. Or at least Fincher wanted him to look that way. But I think what you said that kind of made me think about it again was like, it's so Sorkin. It's so Sorkin, and it's edited so beautifully that the Sorkinism comes through tenfold because it's edited perfectly. You got the Reznor score in there. You've got Fincher's hand at it. But then when you have the words flying back and forth with the quick cuts, with the time jumps, all that, it might just be a little confusing, or it might just be a little bit much.
There's a lot of stuff in Social Network that I think if you are somebody who's going to get turned off by that real fast-paced Sorkin-y stuff, where you would just be like, people don't talk like that. Like, why am I? This is like off-putting.
You even said in the beginning, you were like, I honestly think, even though I love the opening with Eisenberg and Rooney Mara, you're like, I wouldn't be surprised if after that happened, some people might be like, I'm okay.
I can imagine my mother turning off The Social Network. I can imagine her sitting there trying to watch it and being like, because
they're having two separate conversations at the same time also, and then they talk about having two separate conversations and being confused.
Because normally a page in feature is about a minute, right? That's how it works?
Yeah, roughly.
So I think it's almost double that is what that scene is.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're trying to go through 2 pages in a minute, and he kept saying, do it faster, do it faster, do it faster. So that's why the back and forth is just incredibly tight. And yeah, I could see it turning somebody off. I don't think you're wrong, though, because I mentioned this earlier. What Social Network has is that it's effectively structured like a biopic, like a music biopic.
Yeah.
Like the band is getting big, the lead singer gets all the acclaim, his best friend drummer gets betrayed, like all that stuff. The hotshot record exec is just Justin Timberlake. He comes in and he like talks him up. It all, that's the story you watch. And so that's there's
the dark moment where the record exec does something bad and there's a departure. Like that also happens. And it's also PG-13, right? Which is very few and far between for Fincher. And let me double check that because I don't want to make an idiot out of myself, and I'm happy to be wrong. But when I think about it, I think I'm right. I don't think Social Network is rated R, whereas basically everything else is that he does, and that's a big part of like when I go to it is PG-13. When I go to recommend movies, I think maybe again because of the way I was raised, I go for something that's PG-13. So that's the recommended movie. I'm going Social Network. You're going with Panic Room, which again I think is a great pick. What's the disclaimer movie? What's the movie that you're like, well, I don't know if you really want to watch.
I'm
that
pretty
movie.
sure, without a doubt, no question for me, it has to be Dragon Tattoo, and it's because of the scenes that we talked about to open this
Yeah,
podcast.
we buried the lead a little bit with the way we opened the show.
I don't know if they're like. Can you imagine what would happen if somebody said to you, "Hey, recommend a drama to me," and like, let's say they were, the faint of heart. Let's say they
It was
weren't
what if it was like a coworker who
Yeah.
you'd work with for like a month.
yeah. And you didn't know that much about them. They were
Right.
really nice. You don't know if they're, not like, what their religious background or
Anything. You know nothing about them other than they'd like to talk about cool movies sometimes.
Yeah, and they were like, "Hey, Ford Ferrari was great," and you're like,
You're like, you should watch The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
You're like, David Fincher, it's riveting. And then they would come to work and they just look at you like, "What the hell is wrong with you?"
Either that or they just like come to work and they're like, hey, and they
Yeah.
just like keep their head down and walk away. I'm just gonna piggyback on it's definitely The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah.
For as much as there's great things about this movie, the music again, the cinematography, I think you and I both kind of okay, so let's actually you guys obviously know why we think this is the disclaimer movie. The other parts about this movie that don't really work, it feels like you and I both don't love the end of this movie either. I think it's a little more necessary maybe than you do, but I think still at the end of the day, if it needed to get cut, I'd be totally okay with it.
Well, I think that this movie is like almost 3 hours. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes. And so they add about 15 extra minutes at the end or so, 15, 20, that is like, I think it's a setup for a sequel, or it's supposed to probably wrap a plot line from the source material or something. But it just feels like the story that I watched does not need that literally at all. And as a movie that is both a little unsettling to watch, also it's really long for a movie. Like, if recommending any movie that's close to 3 hours to somebody is it's a tough sell.
Yeah, that's a good point
I
as
love
well.
Magnolia, but I'm not going to recommend Magnolia to somebody unless I really know, like, I know the kind of movie they want to watch, because they're just going to get 35 minutes into it. If they're not hooked, they're going to turn it off. And I'm like, you missed so much of the movie.
Yeah, and I mean the title of this new, approachability segment came from the fact that I literally gave my girlfriend a disclaimer before watching the movie. I was like, we could watch Seven or we could watch The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, because I was going through the Fincher rewatch for the show. She's like, well, I've already seen Seven. I was like, okay, I just want to let you know this movie will stick with you in ways that you don't really want it to.
Yeah.
And like she couldn't watch those scenes. I couldn't even watch
those scenes. She immediately looked up the ending of the film.
Yes, you know how much I love that. So that's going to be The Social Network and The Panic Room are our recommendations. Our disclaimer film is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which leads us to the last segment here. It used to be called Visibility, but now we've come up with a much better name for it.
It's called the You Lied About Having Seen It movie.
Oh, yeah. No, I turned it on in college. Maybe like 10 years ago I watched it once.
Have you ever seen Fight Club before?
Oh, definitely.
Once, a long time ago, on TV.
I was like 12 though, but I remember it being good. Yeah, there's that, and there's that movie.
Yeah.
Right? So as for visibility, you talk about the most visible project that David Fincher's done, and then the one that's probably been forgotten about. Not that you want to forget about it, but just kind of has been forgotten about. What's the movie that you think people have to lie about seeing?
I think for me, it's at this point, it is now The Social Network. There was a time in my life that I would have said something else, but it is The Social Network now, and it's because, when the best of the decade lists got put together, when at the end of the 2010s, we got into 2020, that fateful year, when everybody was making their lists, there was a couple consistent movies that were on everybody's list, and the most consistent best movie of the 10-year stretch was The Social Network. It was on every single list as the best or the second best. Fury Road, Get Out, those are a couple of the ones in the top 5 for most people, but it was deemed by all like film minds as the consensus best movie of 10 years.
Wow.
Fight Club, as good as it is and as iconic as it's become, Seven, these are movies that really defined the 90s on some level. There was a lot of great movies in the 90s. If you ask people what's the best movie of the 90s, you're not going to find a single person that looks you in the face and says it's Fight Club.
Really? You don't think anyone will?
Somebody, but think about if you
might.
If I think about the opinion of the 90s, and somebody who's going to have a hot take, they might say it's The Matrix, or they might say it's Pulp Fiction, or they might
Heat.
There's so many iconic movies from the 90s that I don't think there is like a
Jurassic Park. Yeah. It's a crazy list. Well, it sucks because my movie that I feel like you'd have to lie about seeing is Fight Club.
Yeah.
Now, and to kind of counter what you're saying is we are still we might be older men, but we're not that old yet.
Yeah.
Right? Like the music that we listened to on the radio growing up, it's not like people that have never been heard of by the next generation. You know, they know somewhat, at least peripherally. They've heard of Britney Spears, right?
Yeah.
So Fight Club feels like that exact same vein for me. It still feels like, you know, people our age are starting to have kids. People our age, you know, we're into our 30s, which means we have the late 20s and the early 40s kind of locked down when you talk about our friend demographic. Fight Club is still so important, I think, to this generation.
Yeah.
And the generation that precedes and follows because of how important it was to us specifically. I feel like that's the one movie out of all 11 of Fincher's that if you were to look at and go, have you not seen this movie? Fight Club is the only one that you would be super embarrassed about. Whereas Social Network, I feel like I could cover my ass. I could be like, oh my God, I know, I can't believe I haven't seen it. I'm not a huge fan of Sorkin, and like, you know, his writing can kind of lose me sometimes. I should probably check it out. You're right.
I do think that there are arguments against my point, but I think that Fight Club still holds, because what Fight Club is that when you ask somebody who's young, let's say we'll use the word young.
28.
Let's say you ask somebody who's in high school. Let's say you ask somebody who's high school or college, and they really like movies, and they're going through a phase where they're trying to really get into movies. Well, it's unlikely, unless they've had some reason to, that they're going to dig all the way back to like the 40s and 50s. What's more likely is they're going to focus on movies that came out when they were very young or just before they were born. Like the movies that were iconic, recently iconic when they were growing up. So for us, the movies like that were Back to the Future.
Yeah, everything big in the 80s, period.
Platoon. Like the movies that won Oscars or were everybody's favorite movie from the 80s. E.T. These are the iconic movies when we were growing up that as we were probably in the 90s, we went back to rewatch those movies, The Breakfast Club, because these were like the movies. So Fight Club, for somebody in high school today, is a movie that came out a few years before they were born, right? They're probably thinking about, this movie was famous the whole time I grew up. Brad Pitt's still famous, so I can enjoy watching these actors who I know who they are, but it's old. 20 plus years is an older movie. Like, it's not a new release by any means. It's faded in some sense, but it feels cool to like it because it's not recent.
Right.
So I think that's...
Whereas, like, growing up saying you like Fight Club was like, well, duh. I like The Matrix. I also like Breathing.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
That's fair.
So I think that your point there is sound, because I actually think that the generation of people that loves The Social Network is a different type of person. And I wonder if 20 years later, I wonder 10 years from now, if The Social Network will have the same cachet that it has now, or if it's having a moment because of the generation of podcasters and writers and social media that we're in, if it'll fade out more. But for me, that's the one that I feel like is the most important movie currently in his catalog that you would have to lie about having seen.
So then, conversely, on the other side of that, what's the... Oh, yeah, David Fincher directed that movie. I forgot about that movie.
Well, I think it's hilarious. I'm going to let you take yours first.
Yeah.
I think I know what it is. It's good.
I'm actually going to swap it out on you.
Okay.
And it's funny, because I think you thought I was going to say Mank.
Yeah,
because
I did.
I haven't watched it. I just won't. I've, like, turned it on, and I was just like, I don't want to watch this movie.
Yeah.
Why does this movie matter? All right, because this guy directed, this guy starred in it, and it's apparently available on Netflix, which I can watch.
Yeah.
But for me, actually... My last second change up here, I'm gonna go to Zodiac.
Really?
Really. And the reason I say that is because for how much people love that movie now,
Yeah.
and how forgotten about it was when it came out, and how technically wonderful that movie is, and how great the performances are, and the thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, one of the reasons I brought it up is like, there are very few movies that actually take you on the journey of what the characters are going through. Yeah. Right? So when you're watching Zodiac, it feels long and drawn out and a little convoluted, but you could still kind of follow what's going on.
And dissatisfying at the end.
Dissatisfying at the end because it wasn't solved, but it also feels repetitive. It feels repetitive throughout, but different, and that's important because you have to imagine when those officers and those detectives were going through all the steps they needed to take to solve this crime, it felt repetitive as shit.
Yeah.
They did the same thing, asked the same questions, went to the same places over and over and over and over. And I think for Zodiac, people, not like us, but I think the general public just forgets that movie existed. And I think they also forget how great that movie is. I was that person just a couple years ago when you were like, dude, I know. Go and watch Zodiac. Trust me. It's better than you remember. It's phenomenal. You're like, it might even be my favorite. There's no way. Maybe it's my favorite. And like, I feel like that's why I had to switch it up here is because when I think about Zodiac, obviously I know it was directed by Fincher and I appreciate it. But I think the general public completely forgets it exists.
That it's even a movie.
Whereas Mank is so relevant still. Yeah. It just happened.
It's funny because I was talking to my buddy Yuval, who loves our old podcast, and I was like, we got the podcast launched, you should listen to it. I was like, we're doing Fincher. And so I was like, yeah, he's done this movie and that movie. And he did Mank, and he's like, I don't even know what that is. Like, so I was like, it's pretty perfect.
Yeah, that is great.
But for me, it's actually, I'm going to go with, I think the movie that like people just don't remember even happened, or if they do, they definitely don't know it's Fincher, and that's The Game. It's
sick.
Yeah.
It was a dream all along. I mean, I know that's not exactly what it was.
It's The Game, Bud Fox. It's Michael Douglas, and he's
Christian Slater.
No, it's Sean Penn.
Sean Penn, right.
Yeah, Conrad. It's sweet. He's the best part of the movie. But this is a movie that it has been immortalized by the people who grew up watching it because it was a Fincher movie, and he did Seven, and everybody loved Seven, and so they wanted the follow-up, and so they watched this, and they expected it to be good. They talked themselves into it being really good. And then Fight Club came out. So now you have a movie that should, by all intents and purposes, be as good as you felt like it is, because now this guy's done, two great movies, a bad franchise movie, but this Michael Douglas thriller.
Right.
But as I mentioned earlier, thrillers owned the 90s. Like a movie like The Game is just one in a sandcastle. Like it's just, there's so many pieces that fit into that stack. There are a million thrillers from the 90s. And I think that most people would literally see this on a streaming platform, scrolling next to A Perfect Murder and right next to Kiss the Girls.
Right.
And they wouldn't even think twice. It has a less famous star by today's standards than Michael Douglas, so I think it matters even less. This doesn't have Morgan Freeman, you know?
Yeah, and Douglas feels way more disconnected now because Freeman's still doing stuff.
Yeah, he just, Douglas, had this weird run of being a superstar where he was, but he, didn't... He has a weird cachet that does not still hold, and so I think The Game is that movie.
He did a lot of erotic thrillers in the 90s.
Yes, he did.
And they they don't age well.
I respectfully disagree.
All right, so now you guys know, the movies that you have to lie about seeing or that you forget exist, the availability, the approachability, and the rewatchability, those things are very important, or visibility, are very important when you come down to what is the actual best and the worst. So we talked about this a moment ago. I'm going to plug it one more time if you guys want. Let us know. Tag us on Twitter. Screenshot it. Let us know in the comments what's the best, what's the worst. You've heard all of our criteria. You've heard our favorites. So let's get into the worst first.
Yeah, I think the worst is a cop-out answer, and I think anybody who ranks Fincher movies on any site's going to have the same one. It's Alien 3.
It's got to be.
And the reason is for all the things we said earlier. It's the fact that the first two films are considered 2 of the 100 greatest films probably ever made, or close to it. It's the fact that this is a movie that was taken away from a music video director in his first-time effort. It's listless. It sort of doesn't even have a tone. Alien, even Resurrection, which is not my favorite Alien movie, is a much more entertaining movie than Alien 3.
This movie's all over the place. It's not very enjoyable to watch, and all the things that made you love Alien and Aliens are kind of missing in Alien 3. And again, it just doesn't feel a lot like a Fincher movie. So that's his 11th. That's the worst of the worst for us. The next best, number 10. I'm going to let you take this one because you've actually seen it.
Most of it. Our number 10 movie is Mank. Now, this is really controversial. What's funny about Fincher's career is that even his least liked movies have so much acclaim in a lot of ways.
Unlike his most liked movies that had 0 in the beginning of his career.
It's really weird.
Really fascinating.
But I think that Mank checks all these boxes. Number one, it's the Hollywood doing the masturbatory Hollywood thing where they love to award the artist. They love to talk about La La Land. Hollywood loves to give Oscar nominations to movies about Hollywood.
Yes.
So that's what Mank is.
Once upon a time.
It's a black and white movie with a really, really great score and a really interesting premise, but it's just not engaging. It lacks... When we talk about Fincher and what makes him a great director, I always want to give a great artist their due. I will encourage any great artist to go out on a limb and try something. He tried something with this movie. There's a lot of cool things here, but I have zero interest in going to rewatch this movie ever again, to try finishing this movie. And for God's sakes, Gary Oldman is one of my favorite actors to ever live.
Yeah.
He stars in this movie as an incredibly famous writer.
And that's why it's your Never Again movie, or that's why it's up there when we're talking about Never Again films, is because rewatchability is really, really important, right?
Yeah.
That's why we have it as one of our pieces of this movie science thing. Rewatchability matters, and Mank for you. So that means that number 9 for me it's going to be The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, because that's the movie that I don't ever want to rewatch. And when we were talking about breaking this list down, rewatchability came into play a lot, because when you talk about the other pieces of this, when you talk about the worst, I would rather watch The Game. I would rather watch Panic Room. I'd rather watch Mank than this, but that's only because I haven't watched it, which I'm embarrassed to say on the show. But I just think, like what you said, they do a lot of great things in here.
Yeah.
It's some of the coolest makeup you've ever seen. It's really an interesting and fascinating story. There's great romantic vignettes. All that stuff being said, it's over 3 hours long.
Wow, is it really over 3 hours?
No,
Close to it.
but it feels that way. it's 6 hours long.
It's damn close to it if it's not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a famously long movie. There's that joke in The League, that show we used to watch all the time, where like the main character ends up doing like a sex video with his wife and hides it in the box of The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. He's like, nobody ever watches this movie. And then at the end of the episode, somebody's like opened it up and tried to watch it. And it always made me laugh. Yeah, I mean, I think, because the only other movie really that you could argue would be The Game, but I find The Game to be more watchable than any of these movies, so like I would put
Is
it
The
higher.
Game a better movie than The Curious Case of Benjamin Button?
Probably not.
Probably not. But
No.
this isn't about the greatest movie ever made. This is the best and the worst, according to you and myself. And
I think he only has. I actually think if the incredible thing about a guy that's done 11 movies is that he has one bad movie. He has 10 movies
Yes,
that
right.
are at least good or interesting. He has
Yep.
one bad movie.
yes, because Mank and Benjamin Button are good. They
Yeah.
are interesting. They did groundbreaking things. Gary Oldman is one of the greatest actors to ever live. Alien 3 is really the only actual bad movie, and that's actually really reflected in the scores on IMDb and on Rotten Tomatoes
Yeah.
of every single one of the films. Alien is the only rotten movie,
Yep.
period. So now when we get to the best, we're going to do it a little bit different, because you and I actually have not come to a consensus number one. I think this is the moment where you and I can give our final pitch piece and maybe try to win the other one over. And this is what I'm going to say. At the end of The Social Network, I don't feel anything other than Zuckerberg's kind of an asshole and David Fincher's a genius, and this movie was really great.
Yeah.
Right? There has never been any moment in watching any of his films that feel as satisfying as the very first time I watched Fight Club. Even the second time I watched Fight Club. Whether it's the very end of the movie and the Pixies Where's My Mind playing and seeing the buildings blow up, or it's the moment when he realizes who Tyler Durden really is and why he's not supposed to say that name to her and not supposed to talk about him to Marla Singer, right? Like, that moment, that reveal, I don't care how many decades go by, I don't care if people look back at this movie 50 years later, if they've never seen it before, they'll still have that holy shit moment.
You love me, you hate me. You show me a sensitive side, then you turn into a total asshole. Is that a pretty accurate description of our relationship, Tyler?
We have just lost cabin pressure.
What did you just say?
What is wrong with you?
What did you just call me? Say my name.
Tyler Durden. Tyler Durden, you fucking freak. What's going on? I'm coming over.
No, wait, Marla, I'm not there.
I mean, for me, I'm arguing for The Social Network.
I know
here.
we are. We all know you are.
Yeah, and I love both of these movies, and I'm totally happy because I think in my mind the ranking would have been Fight Club 2 after The Social Network. So I agree with what you're saying. I can remember watching Fight Club. I can remember the reveal and how it made me feel.
I yelled. I was like, oh my God.
It was
That's what
like-
I sounded like as a kid.
I was like, oh my God, this
Oh my
reveal
God.
is crazy. No, if I can't think of many situations, many twists in a movie. Sixth Sense, but like same year actually. I can't think of that many twists that ever had the effect on me that Fight Club did. It was, and I also do think there's something really important about the fact that movie stars and characters in movies that are played by movie stars are cool. It's like a thing. All of culture grows up idolizing these people, and it's arguable that is the coolest movie character I've ever seen is Tyler
Right.
Durden. Like people sculpted their bodies to look like him when he's got the gloves on.
Right.
Like that's a thing.
That, like, lean.
It's a thing in fitness that
six-pack
guys like
thing,
know. It's
yeah.
like the Brad Pitt Fight Club scene. Like
Right.
people like know it. It's like a thing. So
You're
there's
going
a lot.
for Gerard 300 or Brad Pitt
Yeah.
Fight Club? And you're like, well, maybe in between.
So there's definitely cachet there. I think for me, it's interesting. Our three films that ended up making our top three here all have something similar, which is that they speak on, I think, the most relevant cultural expressions in any of Fincher's storytelling.
Yeah.
A lot of his movies are really about murder and they're about solving the case. Like Zodiac's a great movie. It's a phenomenal movie. But Zodiac is not about something other than...
It doesn't speak on something bigger than itself.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, in The Social Network, they talk regularly about... And it also stems the conversation of people watching it, but, like, Rooney Mara, and just, like, how bad social media really is, and, like, why do people need this? And, like, you called me a bitch on the internet. The internet is written in ink, not in pencil. Like, all these things that have become so true, and especially with the Me Too stuff that happened, and you look at all the horrible things in workplaces, or you look at people in cancel culture with, like, what's happened of things that they've said in their past, like, Social Network does speak on things that we are living in the thick of it.
That's why I think I believe the Social Network will only grow in terms of its impact. And where I think the message of Fight Club really is that you have... Its message is that you have a bunch of people who are growing up right now believing they're going to be influencers. It's the number one profession in the world that kids want to be as an influencer. That's what they want, right? And Fight Club speaks to a different generation of people that were told they were going to be rock stars and astronauts, right? They were told this, and they're angry that it's not. So it's speaking on a similar thing. There is definitely some anarchistic take down the system stuff that I think relates to stuff we've seen in the media with the Capitol building, with stuff like that. I do think that there are some relationships there that do speak on right now issues, but I really think the Social Network was relevant in 2010. I think in 2021, the idea of exclusivity, they frequently say what it has is that it's cool. We don't know what it is yet, but what it has for it is that it's cool.
It's not anything yet.
Of being a part of something that is cool. His whole idea of, hey, look at all of the things I've done. My worth is determined by how much, the club I'm in, how much money I have, right? Being accepted, being asked to the cool kids table. It's like the most age-old problem in the world that social media, all it does is the more followers you have, the more alone you feel, but the more famous and respected you're supposed to be. That's what the movie's about. And that is the actual culture we're living in right now, 10 years later, so much more than it even was then.
Yeah, and Fight Club feels a lot like that exact thing, though, of just the past generation, or the past 2 decades, I guess I should say, is because, like, the whole materialism is evil in that movie, and, like, selling rich people their fat asses back to them. It's all in there still.
Yep.
It's maybe just that The Social Network is the next Fight Club in his entire filmography that's going to speak on what we're going through right now for another 20 plus years. Because, you know, when you watch Social Network, you know, I watched it last night again, and my girlfriend was telling me, she's like, it's so crazy. Like, you watch this movie and you're just like, should this have ever been invented? Like, I don't think so. It would have happened no matter what. But, like, should social media have ever been invented to the level it was? Because, like, even at the time that Facebook was coming out, MySpace felt like it was already dying off.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, it was like, if it just didn't happen, if Facebook didn't happen, something else probably would have. But, yeah, and it's... God, it's so hard.
Can you even remember, like, the scene in the movie when he comes up with the relationship status button on the wall?
It's brilliant.
Is, like, it happens in the movie, and you go, wow, like, that, no one hadn't existed yet in the world.
Well, he's like, and what's the point of it?
Yeah.
People want to have sex.
Yeah.
That's what they want to do. And so now they know if they can, if they have an opportunity, if they have a chance, that girl in your class, like, now you're going to sit by him, now you're not. Like, all of that.
Relationship status. Interested in. This is what drives life in college. Are you having sex or aren't you? It's why people take certain classes and sit where they sit and do what they do when at some center, you know? That's what the Facebook is going to be about. People are going to log on because after all the cake and watermelon, there's a chance they're actually going to get laid. Meet a girl. Yes. That is really good.
All right. I'll let you have this one, Bateman. We could give the best movie of all time from David Fincher is The Social Network.
But I'm happy to give Fight Club a close number 2.
So I think the interesting...
You're like, shut your mouth.
I'm sure you are. So I think the interesting here is the number 3. There's so many great options out there, right? There's Mank. There's Panic Room. There's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. There's a lot of other things. There's Zodiac, realistically. There's, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which you and I both loved. But you and I have this adoration, and you made it very clear at the beginning of this episode, for Gone Girl. And this movie is brilliant. It is a great watch. It's uncomfortable, but it's a great watch.
It's also his highest grossing film of all time. It's his biggest hit in terms of popular opinion, like popular appeal. And I think...
And that's like the perfect culmination of how famous Ben Affleck was and who David Fincher had become.
Exactly. I think that with this movie, what I mentioned that each of the 3 movies we chose have a really, really specific statement to make. And I think that Gone Girl's statement that it makes, and it's obviously based on the novel written by Gillian Flynn, is that, you know, this movie came out in 2014.
Yeah.
In 2000, I think 18 or 19, there was this enormous number of villainous men exposed for having, and I should say more than men, people in the Me Too movement who were exposed for having done horrible things. And there was a lot of honesty and truth and believe women. And that was that year, the 2 years of that conversation happening. Would this movie even have gotten made had it gotten pitched in 2019? And I think the answer is probably no, because this movie is literally about, you want to believe women, but she's framing him for murder the whole time.
It's like an oddly, like, reverse misogyny, but it still is, because it goes back to, like, I mean, he's the good guy, even though he's the bad guy, even though he's the one cheating, he's the one lying, he's the one being a half-assed husband, he's the one doing everything wrong, but she's actually the villain. And no matter what she says or what she does, you now as the audience member know the truth about halfway plus through the movie. And I think it's a really interesting question that you pose is like, would this movie be digestible now? Like, would you be able to watch that movie comfortably now? And I think yes, as a rewatch or as a first-time viewing, knowing that this movie came out when it did.
Yeah.
But I think if you were like, this movie was released in 2021, this is what it's about, watch it, I think they'd still be able to recognize it's a good movie, but they'd be like, what is the point of this? Is this to speak on Me Too? Whereas this movie came out before that movement had actually taken place.
Like, this movie creates, just by existing, a dangerous narrative by people. And it's funny about that is, it creates a dangerous narrative in exactly the same way Fight Club did. Fight Club was misunderstood. I think they're both satire on some level of the subject they're talking about.
Exactly, and I'm so glad you say that, because satire is, if you go and you read about, you know, the book, or you go and you read about the Wikipedia just on the movie of Gone Girl, it's like, it is supposed to be somewhat satirized, just like Fight Club.
Yep. And I think that's what Fincher responds to, but he likes to tell his stories deadly serious. That's how he is. And so I think that that's for me why it's the third. I really believe there's a world in which I could convince myself that Seven is like his best or second best movie. I know there's a world I can convince myself that Zodiac is in the top 2 or 3.
Yeah.
For me, that's probably the 5 options. Maybe even Dragon Tattoo. I love that movie. But for me, like, pound for pound, Gone Girl's his last hit. It's his last hit movie. Since Gone Girl, you know, he's done some other stuff, but this was a massive movie. Everyone was talking about this movie, and I think it deserves the credit that we're giving it here as the number 3 David Fincher movie.
Absolutely. So Gone Girl's number 3, Fight Club number 2, Social Network is the best David Fincher film. The worst David Fincher film is Alien 3, but if that feels like a bit of a gimme to you, we have Mank and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button shortly following that at 10 and 11. So, were you guys right? Were you guys wrong? We'll find out. We'll shout you guys out next week. If you were, what's left for David Fincher? Now, you know, we got introduced to him in 2011. Now we are caught up to present day. He's now almost 60 instead of 50. What now? What does he do next?
You know, what's insane about this question to me, and I was kind of thinking about this just a second ago when I said about Gone Girl, 2014 was 7 years ago, and this movie was a big hit.
Wow.
But, wow. Didn't realize.
Jesus, what is happening?
But since making that movie in 2014 and being in this moment where, you know, he was getting all these Oscar nominations for his lead actors for like 4 movies in a row, he was getting lead noms for his actors. He literally makes this movie and he follows it up with his next movie doesn't happen until Mank. Right? He makes Mank and it's critically well received, but it's not a hit. It came out in 2020, so it was one of those movies that got Oscar buzz because there weren't movies that year. So it was Fincher. He's done 2 seasons of Mindhunter,
which was pretty good. I like Mindhunter a lot, but it also got canceled.
And he's decided to, you know, become a part of this deal with Netflix, where they're like, "Hey, if you make content for us, we'll give you the money and time to do what you want to do." And I think, in that sense, if David Fincher releases one more movie that is kind of mediocre, like let's say he was to release a movie that just doesn't work, I think we would have to agree that David Fincher is peaked and on the back end. It's hard to not even just say that now. Like he doesn't feel like he has the same cachet like Denis Villeneuve, David Fincher right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even close. Like,
right?
if this was a stock, if you had to buy or sell David Fincher or buy or sell Denis Villeneuve, it would be, hands down, without a doubt, you all go with Denis Villeneuve. I think it's too early to sell David Fincher. I think exactly what you're saying. All the things are correct. He needs to go back to prestige filmmaking in theaters. He needs to return to thrillers because Gone Girl was 7 years ago, and that movie was phenomenal. He needs to win an Oscar.
Yeah.
He just does. Like, I know that's such a weird thing to say. It's not really something you say about actors as much. For some reason, it feels like directors have almost more control over it, even though I know that's not the case.
Yeah.
But it feels like David Fincher must win an Oscar, the same way that I feel like Nolan must win an Oscar by the end of his career. It's just that Fincher's been around for a very long time. He's he's 60 now, so I think I'm keeping David Fincher. I'm buying him if he's a stock. I'm reticent though. I'm nervous, and I hope that the next thing that he does is a bit of a return to what we love. Because if it's not, I think your point about him being forgotten could happen a lot more quickly than it should.
Yeah, I think it's crazy, man. Like we working in the business we work in and being around this stuff all the time, we love David Fincher, and so we're willing to give him a lot of credit and give him a lot of leniency. But I think the people that are not as obsessed with Fincher as we are probably look back and say the last truly great movie he made was 11 years ago. And it was The Social Network, right? Like, a lot of people don't think of Dragon Tattoo as a hit, and they don't think of Gone Girl as great in the same way. They think of it as a good thriller they liked watching, but not great.
Like a great film.
Like a prestige movie.
Yeah.
It's this, and with Nolan, it's funny you bring him up. Dunkirk is regarded as a great movie. It was nominated for all these Oscars. It's regarded as a classic now. Like, that was recent, right? But if he hadn't made Dunkirk, you'd be going all the way back to Inception. So it's like he has one in there. So it is interesting. I would say I'm the same as you. I think he has so much clout with movie nerds that I think whatever he does will have, like, I'll see it.
Of course.
I did not like Mank, but I will watch whatever.
Yeah, I guess I could have said that I would. I still will. I'll still get there.
Yeah.
So, guys, that's going to do it for the best and the worst of David Fincher. Make sure you're subscribed on iTunes, following us on Spotify. Leave us a review, because if you do, we'll shout you out, just like this great list of people. 1984, Charlotte. Let Me Remove Idle Matches, whatever that means. Allison Salamone, Fit Girl User. Arcanize, Socks Talon, Author K, Smithy Speaks, Eric in Dallas, Rolling Stone 25, and Noble Penguin. We see your reviews. We appreciate them. We appreciate all the 5-star ratings that we've gotten out there. We appreciate all the ratings, but as of right now, we're pitching a perfect game at 5 stars.
Damn strizzle.
See, we say cool stuff. We're young. And, of course, if you guys want to support us, you can do it. The best way to do that is, of course, you can reach out to us, Ben Bateman Media on Twitter. I'm Andrew Ghai, but patreon.com/team action. We got a list of people that we need to shout out that have been supporting us since day one. Here we go. All right, a big time shout out to our generals in our Patreon. Patreon.com/team action is the best way to support us in what we're doing. And this is also a great place to get in on the conversation. Before we tape these episodes, we talk to our generals in the Action Army about their ideas of what makes a great martial artist, what makes a great Ryan Gosling film, and next week, what makes the best or the worst David Fincher film. And we'll start with Call Sign Kilmer, Quiz Show, Ripper, Demon King, Excalibur, Caddyshack, The Chosen One, Public Enemy #1, Kaiju, ACP, Freedom, Robin, Kimura, Moses, Galactus, Bartab, Party J, Congo, The Gray, Phantom, Deja Vu, 24601.
Call sign # Ladies Night, Ladies Minute, JFTB, Wonderland, Quinn, Brosnan, Desperado, Outback, Da Vinci, The Slap, Entrapment, Stamos, Dante's Peak, Director, Top Gun, and Gundam, plus all of our past generals. A big time salute to you guys, and thank you so much for supporting the best and the worst. See you guys next week.